Some people are going to tell you when it comes to this Mercury retrograde that it only gets worse from here. I, however, am going to tell you how to be prepared for this Mercury retrograde so it doesn't fuck you up, right? When the fuckery goes down, this Mercury retrograde, I want you to just blame it on Mercury. Mercury is the scapegoat, okay? Because he is trifling, right? This Mercury retrograde is very much giving prophecy disguised as humor, prophecy disguised as silly little jokes, prophecy disguised as bullshit. So pay attention. The best way to survive this Mercury retrograde is to split it into two halves, right? Don't fumble it in the first half when we have a whole other second half waiting on the sidelines, waiting to stir the pot, okay? The first half of this Mercury retrograde is going to be in the sign of Sagittarius. From November 9th to November 19th, Mercury will be retrograding in the early degrees of Sagittarius. This means that mutable signs, especially early degree mutable signs, Sagittarius, Virgo, Gemini, Pisces, will be most impacted and activated by that Mercury retrograde from November 9th through the 19th. From the 20th through the 29th, okay, Mercury will be retrograding in the sign of Scorpio. So late degree fixed signs, especially Scorpio, Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, Aquarius, will be most impacted by the second half of the Mercury retrograde. Now, the two halves of this Mercury retrograde have very different themes and very different energies, so we're going to break it down. The first half of this Mercury retrograde in the sign of Sagittarius, you will notice that people around you are going to be all over the place. Do not take it personally. People are going to be annoyed by you. People are going to be irritated by you. People are going to not know what the fuck they're doing. Put the blinders on, right? I highly recommend around the first half of this Mercury retrograde to maybe remain a bit cryptic, maybe move in silence, okay? Sit back and observe. Not everything needs your reaction because Sagittarius is a very volatile sign. No shade, okay? And Leo, I think out of all the fire signs, is probably the most emotional. But when it comes to being volatile, that crown is given to Sagittarius. Sagittarius just has little fires everywhere going at all times, right? There is a method to the madness that many of us will never understand. Sagittarius is also the fire sign that can come off very holier than thou. It's kind of unintentional, but it kind of is intentional, right? They kind of have a bit of a preachy vibe. So I highly recommend around this Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, this first half, is to really make sure to not speak on things that you really don't know anything about. Don't jump the gun. Don't immediately make assumptions. Don't jump to conclusions, okay? Avoid acting out of haste, right? Keep people guessing about what you're doing. Do not be afraid to kind of just like go a bit MIA during the first half of this Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. Mercury is debilitated in the sign of Sagittarius. Mercury is already a very neurotic, scatterbrained planet, and it doesn't do well in the sign of Sagittarius because Sagittarius doesn't pay attention to the details. Sagittarius is very, big-minded, if you will. Sagittarius cares about the concepts. Sagittarius has the concept of a plan, but doesn't actually have any way to figure out what the steps are to get there. It is not detail-oriented. So try not to get lost in the sauce. Try not to be pulled in a million different directions, right? You are not an octopus. You are not actually going to be able to do all of those things. You may find yourself maybe even compelled to agree and say yes to doing more things than you can actually execute. So this first half of the Mercury retrograde, I really want you to pull back. This is also going to be a Mercury retrograde. The first half is going to be ruled by Jupiter in Cancer. So you may find yourself more reflective. This is going to be bringing up feelings of, okay, reflecting. We're going internal. We maybe feel a little bit nostalgic. We maybe feel a little bit sentimental. We maybe even be thinking back to old versions of ourselves that was doing things, more successfully. Maybe older versions of ourselves that were thriving more. We might even be looking back with, rose-colored glasses, thinking back, oh, things were so much better, back then, right? And we might even not realize, okay, that's a bit of a grass is greener mentality. We have to remain in the present. We have to stay grounded, which can maybe be hard during Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. Sagittarius, you may find that you have, some issues surrounding friends and siblings. There might be some weird kind of musical chairs going on. Remember that during Mercury retrograde, nothing is permanent, okay? So try not to get too caught up in what is happening because we won't know really the core and the real message that this Mercury retrograde is driving home until November 20th, when we're going to have the Mercury Sun Cazimi. And this is really going to be really shining a light on what this Mercury retrograde is trying to. The first half of this retrograde is also probably going to be bringing up feelings of guilt and regret towards unfinished projects, some visions and goals that have been in the graveyard for some time now. You might be feeling a lot of shittiness regarding things that like maybe you procrastinated on or let go of, missed opportunities. We're going to be feeling a bit of that limerence around Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius during this first half, okay? And so really to keep in mind, Mercury is of course debilitated in Sagittarius. And so what this is going to show us during the first half of this retrograde is the limits of what we can know, right? It's going to be showing us what we don't have control over. Jupiter is going to help soothe, because we have Jupiter in Cancer, right, ruling this first half of this retrograde, right? And so Jupiter is going to soothe maybe some of these anxieties and some of these worries. Jupiter is about faith and fate, okay? Jupiter is about the bigger ideas. And so some of this energy might even be making you realize, okay, actually, I have a new sense of hope towards this new era that is coming. Because once we get to the second half of this retrograde in Scorpio, that is when we can silence a lot of this noise, right, and this static, and focus on one idea. After the Mercury Sun Cazimi on the 20th, which is really going to be this aha light bulb moment, making us realize, okay, this is what I need to be doing. The second half of this retrograde in Scorpio is when we can really investigate and really get to the heart of what this retrograde is trying to make us realize. Because really this retrograde is kind of like, from a distance, it looks like this monster, but when you get closer, you realize it's just this harmless, thing. Right? And it's all about perspective. And Mercury is the planet about how we understand things. And how we understand things, sometimes it needs to be shifted. Sometimes we do have to change our perception, right? So both of these halves of this retrograde are deeply interconnected, but we can't jump to conclusions. We can't jump the gun. We do have to really practice patience with this retrograde, especially during the first half, because we're not going to really know what it's telling us until we complete the full journey. There are steps along the way. And again, Sagittarius is very volatile, so you may feel the need to act on emotion. You may feel the need to act on recklessness. But the first half of this retrograde is really showing you that you have to control yourself. It's really going to be teaching us self-control, right? This first half of the retrograde is really going to be about ripping off the band-aid. Sometimes it might even be a little bit unpleasant, okay? So that when we get to the second half of this retrograde in Scorpio, which is really going to be affecting, again, the late degree Scorpio placements and fixed signs, right? This is where we're going to be seeing maybe some resurfacing of old dramas. This might even be, exposés, people telling on themselves, right? And something about Scorpio energy that I love is that the Scorpio-Taurus axis is really all about change and transformation happening in the background. Taurus, of course, is a fixed sign as well, and it is about the earth, of course. And so Earth and nature's cycles move very slow. You have to respect that process. And it's the same with Scorpio. I think a lot of people think that Scorpio energy and transformation happens like that in the blink of the eye. And it doesn't, right? It actually is a very slow process. And so when we get to this second half of the Mercury retrograde in Scorpio, we're going to be really realizing, okay, I can sense a change is happening, and it's been happening in the background for a long time. And before change really happens, you actually sense it in your body first. You sense it, So you might be picking up on hints that change is coming when we get to the second half of this retrograde. You might even feel like there are things coming back during the second half of this retrograde that are here for a redo. So you kind of are getting maybe some second chances around this retrograde, whether that comes to relationships, contracts, maybe at work, right? So you might have thought that things were going one way during the first half of this retrograde, but then when we get to the second half of the retrograde, it goes an entirely different direction, and you really have to adjust and redirect yourself. During the second half of the retrograde, we're going to have Venus conjunct the Mercury retrograde. And so this is really going to give you the audacity to block people, maybe sever some things so you can make proper forward movement. In general, this Mercury retrograde is going to include a lot of delays, whether that's with transportation, whether that's miscommunications and, random mishaps and inconveniences. Beware of trigger tongue and make sure that you are double checking your emails, texts, and messages before you send them.